Good morning, guys. Today we're going to continue, as you see over there on the screen. We're going to continue with our online classes, and today we're going to start with the Unit 23 of the level that is, as you see on the screen, that is models for present and future probability. So at this moment, I want to tell you something. First, when we talk about probability, we need to define what that is. Because if we know what probability is, it will be easier for us to understand how these models are used and why we should use them on different situations. So first things first, what's probability? Well, probability means basically guessing. Guessing basically what do I know about something or how something may happen. So in this case, we're talking about that probability is something that may have happened or will happen, but we are not certain about it. We may have some indicators or some indicatives that that may happen, but we're not completely sure. So we are trying to guess anything on a certain situation. So right now we're going to go ahead and start working on the topic. So let's move on and let's do something else. First, I will be using a little spotlight for you to know the important stuff as you see over there on the screen. So if you have any moment to check, take a look at the places in which I'm marking to you so you have a better idea what I'm talking about. First, we need to know the following. When we talk about models of probability, we are going to talk about these kinds of models. We have seen them before when we studied probability. We know that can and could can be used for probability, but today we're going to study some more. We're going to start with present and future probability. We will see the difference between each of them, and you will notice that some of them, they don't have a big difference at all because they are really simple to use. You have used them before and you are still using them probably without noticing. But let's start with present probability. You see over there on the screen that we have the models can, cannot, could, or could not, may not, might, or must not, and should not. To talk about the probability in the present. Remember, we're just going to use can't, cannot, could, or could not, may or may not, might, must not, or should not to talk about probability just in the present, okay? Keep that in mind because that will be important to differentiate them from the ones that we're going to use to talk about the future. We have used these ones before. If you remember, we studied that can and could can be used to talk about probabilities, right? For example, I can tell you it could rain tomorrow. That is a 50-50 guess that I'm telling you that there is the probability that it may happen tomorrow or it may not. So basically, that's the use that they have. First, these models express how certain you are that something is true. So what I'm telling you right now is how certain is your guess from being the real thing. Because we're guessing, right? We don't know the real answer, but how certain you are that something will happen in a certain way. Over here, when we're talking about these kinds of models, we're going to see a variety of levels in which they go from less certain to more certain. And we're going to see just in a second that. So right now we're going to focus on some examples over here. Here we have, this could be because more women are now have careers. So pay attention to this. This could be because more women now have careers. This is a guess that somebody's doing. This is a 50-50 chance. For example, we can say like, imagine that you're in the context of an office, right? And in the office, you see that more women starting working in the office than men. And then one of the persons that work over there, they will say, oh, this may be because one of them, or maybe many of them are starting to have a career. So that means that many of them are starting to change something, and that could be the reason why they are in this kind of situation right now. So let's focus on another example. The economy may also affect birth rates. That's a possibility, but that's not certain at all because we're using may over here. That's a probability. That's a 50-50 chance as we learned before, if you remember. The same with could. It's a 50-50 chance of something may be happening or not. Now let's move on to the affirmative statements. If you remember, I told you in the last classes what a statement is basically a sentence that we believe is true. You see over there right now on the screen the pattern that we're going to follow. And the pattern is really simple. nothing out of the ordinary. We have used it before. We have been using modals for the 3 levels now. And first we're going to have the subject, then you're going to have the modal verb, that in this case we're going to use must. Notice that must was not in the first list that we saw in the presentation, but we will see how must is used to talk about probability in the present or future. Then we have the base form of the verb. And if you remember, the base form of the verb is the verb without any changes. So that means that I don't need to add an S, I don't need to add an ED, I don't need to add an ING. I'm trying to make you remember that when it is base form, it's the verb as it is, no changes whatsoever. Then we have the complement that we want, any complement that fits the sentence. Remember that your complement needs to make sense in the context of the sentence, right? Then you have, for example, I must be important. That's your conclusion about something. That's your guess about something. That's the probability that you may be important to someone, or in some regards, you're important. So over here, we're talking like, for example, imagine that you go to a place, and when you get to this place, right, this is a fancy place, they start treating you right. They start paying attention to you. They start treating you nicely. They start asking you, if, for example, if you're in a restaurant, if you want something, what they can do for you. You may start thinking, oh, I must be important because they are treating me like that. So then we have, as you see, should, may, might, and could. And we can use them with all the subjects we want. Remember, when we're using modal verbs, it doesn't matter if you are using a third person singular, as we have over here, where we have he, she, or it. It doesn't matter at all, because in this case, what we are doing is that we are basically just making sure that the modals doesn't change at all. So why they do not need to change? The reason why is because over here we're dealing with a modal verb and not with a real verb. It's like if you have an auxiliary. So the base verb of the sentence will be the one that is on this side. So that's why they don't need any changes. It's the same like when you use do or does, okay? Or did in a sentence, in a sentence that is about the past. It is in the negative or the affirmative form. Now let's go to the negative statements. And negative statements, they are basically the same, nothing so much changes that they are going to be difficult to use. They are really simple to make. First, you have the modal verb plus the particle not. Or you can have the contraction. For example, you can say must not or mustn't. But I want you to notice something. Even though you can use mustn't in a contracted form, I want you to notice that not in every situation we can use mustn't. And you will see that later on in the presentation and in the video, but we're going to go step by step. First, you have the base form of the verb, that is be. So I must not be important. Why? Let's go back to the example of the restaurant. You get to a place, and then you see that everybody's being treated right, but you are not. Nobody's paying attention to you. Nobody's asking for your order, and then you may think of yourself, maybe I'm not important. Or I must not be important because somebody important is over here and they are treating him right. So then we have I could not or I couldn't, the same. We can have cannot and can't, and the same happens over here. Should and shouldn't, may not and might not. Notice that may not and might not cannot be contracted at all. We will see the reason to that later on in the presentation. So bear with me for a second and I will explain that to you. You can see that we can use all of the subjects as well without any changes. Now let's focus on the uses, right? So in the uses right now, we have many different things. So first we have the first use, and you see that over here, we have a scale, right? That starts with certain, almost certain, fairly certain, and not certain at all. And we have some space in the bottom over here that will be for the exceptions. So right now, let me move something out of the way. So we're going to start with the first use, that is letter A. As you see on the screen over there, it says, when you're certain that something is true in the present, you do not need a modal. Use the present form. When you are certain that something is true. So remember, in this case, you are not guessing. You already know what's the result. You already know what's the real answer. You're not making a guess. You already have evidence. It has been proven. You don't need to guess anything about a certain situation or event. because you know already that is true. For example, if we have example over there, the birth rate this year is not the same as last year. The birth rate, when we talk about the birth rate, we're talking about the quantity of babies that are being born on this year. In this case, we have some evidence of this because every year, people that they start taking the data of the newborns that are being had in the country or maybe in the world, they start making this data bank in which they can consult each year if it has increased or decreased. So over here we have evidence that something is completely true. For example, another example that something is completely certain, and I can tell you water boils if you put it on the oven. That's certain. That will always happen. It will not be any case in which you put water to boil and it will freeze. That's against the laws of physics and that's impossible at all. But in this case, we have some evidence of the things that are totally certain and will always happen. That is the way in which we are going to use, remember, the present form. So simple present, any form is simple present. For example, you can say when it rains, water comes from the sky to the floor. That's certain. We know that. That happens. We have seen it. That's a law in the world. But that's a law of physics, and that is something that is certain completely, has been scientifically proven, and we don't need to guess. Okay, it's not like I can say, maybe tomorrow it could rain upside down, but that will never happen. But we will see what kind of model we can use when we are almost certain about something. First, we're going to use, well, you see over there another example, the birth rate is declining, maybe because they are comparing the one from last year to the one from this year, or the one from past 5 years to these 5 new years, and then they see a little decrease over there. You must not to draw a conclusion about the present. Listen, must not to draw a conclusion about the present. We're talking about the present, not the future per se. Often because you have evidence, you are almost certain about your conclusion. You have evidence, but you haven't proven it. So that means that you are almost certain. We can say that probably you are 90% certain that something that you believe is true, but not completely true, because it hasn't been proven, okay? It hasn't been tested, but you have evidence. So that means that you're probably 90 or 80% sure that that is the real thing. Let's take a look at the example. She must not live nearby. She never walks to work. So you see, this is an example in which we're seeing a normal certain opinion about something. Why? Because she must not live here. Why is this person saying that? Because she never walks to work. So maybe he's saying probably, we're working an office for saying something. And the office is located on Main Street. But we never see, for example, let's say Maria work to work. Therefore, she must not live near this place because we have never seen the evidence of her walking to work. We have the evidence that she doesn't walk to work. Maybe she takes the bus, or maybe she has a car. But if she takes the bus or she has a car, that means that she comes from a far place, right? She's not from nearby. She comes from probably another city or another state. In our case, probably they come from another department. Like, for example, you're working in San Salvador, and then you see a person that is coming by bus or by car. Probably they come to work from Santa Ana or from San Miguel or many other places from El Salvador. So we have that evidence to determine, and we're almost certain that she doesn't live nearby. We were talking about San Salvador. She doesn't live in San Salvador. So do not use the contraction mustn't in this case, okay? I want you to be clear. I want to be clear with this, that mustn't can be used in these kind of situations. Because she mustn't live nearby, no. For that reason, we're going to use another modal verb, and that's why we have that exception. We are going to use must not when we are almost certain that something is true. That is your conclusion. Your conclusion that you have after you have an observation. Like, for example, what you learn at school, the scientific method, that you know that it is observation, you create a hypothesis, you test it, and then you draw a conclusion. Over here it's the same, but in this case, you're not doing an experiment. It's something that you do on a daily basis, right? So we're going to see what's the difference right away. You see that right now, we have seen that one that is almost certain, and now we move to a different area that is exactly in the middle over here that doesn't have anything to signal it. It's because when we're talking about between almost certain and fairly certain, we're talking about a maybe, okay? A maybe, that means that it's probably, there are some changes that is true, or there are some other chances that is not true. Over here, we have the use numbers, use letter C, that is, use could not, couldn't, cannot, or can't when you are almost certain that something is possible. Notice, the difference is this one. In this one, you are almost certain about your conclusion, about opinion, about what you think about something. You are almost certain. On the other case, on letter C, we are going to use could not, couldn't. Here we can use the contraction, cannot or can, when you are almost certain that something is impossible, okay? Impossible. Why something is impossible? What I'm telling you this is like something that is totally not possible in real life, okay? Something that you see that is not possible to happen whatsoever. So for example, the example that I gave you at the beginning, it cannot rain upside down. That is impossible. That is almost certain that it cannot happen. But we'll see these models usually express a strong disbelief or surprise. What's disbelief? Something that I don't believe at all, okay? Or something that I don't believe is true until I see the proof of that, okay? That is the difference of disbelief. You have the example, the birth rate statistics can be right. They look completely wrong. They can be right. That's your belief, because for you, probably you sit and you think, they seem a little bit off. They seem a little bit awkward, not of the ordinary. Probably they are not right at all. Then we have, they couldn't be at home. They left for vacation yesterday. So they couldn't be at home. So that means that you have certain evidence that it is impossible for them to be at home. Why? Because you saw them leave the day before. So you have certain evidence over here, as well as you had in the other ones. So that's basically the difference. In one, you're talking about your own conclusion, right? When you're using must not, you're almost certain, probably a 90 or 80%. When we're using could not, couldn't, cannot, or can't, we're talking about probably a 60 or no, probably about a 70%, because in this case, we're talking about something that for us is impossible to happen, or impossible to occur, or something that is a surprise for us, okay? For example, I don't know if you have seen movies lately, but I see that, for example, I don't remember the name of the movie, but I was watching a horror movie. I guess it was It Chapter 2. And what happened over there is that when there's a scene in which they are in a restaurant, right? And that they are having a good time. And then the food starts transforming into monsters and everything. And then one of the characters starts saying, this can't be happening. This cannot be happening. This couldn't be happening right now in the present. That means that he's showing strong disbelief, that he doesn't believe that the things that are happening in front of them are real, or that he's surprised at all. That means that in this case, he's showing that he's so surprised at what's happening that he cannot believe that. Let's move on right now. If there is, if that is clear, I want you to please make a question, not over here in the video, obviously, because we are live, but you can make the question either on the comments on the Google Classroom platform or in the WhatsApp chat. So if you have any question, any doubt, or any point in the video, you can let me know, and I will gladly answer them. Letter D, you should not, or shouldn't when you are fairly certain that something is true. Often used because you have evidence, we often use shouldn't. So let me repeat that. When you are fairly certain that something is true, often because you have evidence, we often use shouldn't. Okay? So when we talk about fairly certain, that means that it's like, for example, when we say in Spanish, estoy bastante seguro, okay? Pero no casi seguro. That's the difference. Like, for example, almost certain is casi seguro, fairly certain is bastante seguro. But it's a difference over there. Like this, we're talking about probably 70, 60% that you're sure about something. But in this case, when we have the evidence, over here as well, we need the evidence like in the other cases. But we'll see the example to see it better. They should be at work. They usually are at this time of the day. So we're talking about the evidence that we have to say that probably they are at work is because at this time of the day, every single day, according to the schedule, they are at the office, they are at school, they are at a certain place they work to, and they are working, they are doing their duties. So in this case, I'm telling you that it's fairly certain. So for you to know the difference, let me tell you, there is not so much of a difference between the three of them. Between must, between can, between could, between should and shouldn't, there is not a big difference. The difference will be like kind of in the percentages on how they are certain. Remember that when we're talking about almost certain or we're talking about must, we're talking about probably at 80 or 90%. Here we're talking about probably at 70 or 80%. And here we're talking about 70 or 60. Okay, that's mainly the main difference. But in all of them, you need evidence of something. That's why they don't seem so different in the use, but you see that there are some specific difference. Like for example, the first one is your conclusion, so it's your opinion. The second one is a disbelief or a surprise. That's the other difference. And in the third one is that you're fairly something that something is true. So something that may be true, something that probably somebody said to you, or something that you have seen before. That's mainly the difference. And now we're going to move to the last level of the scale that is not certain. And we have use may not, might not, or could when you are not certain that something is true. You are uncertain, but you are making an educated guess. What's an educated guess? In this case, we're talking about a 50-50 chance. You may be certain, you may be not. But you are making an educated guess. This means that probably you want to throw your 50 cents into the opinion. What do I mean by that? Idiom that probably you want to throw your opinion and maybe it's right or maybe it's wrong, but you want to know. So over here, we have, for example, the economy may not affect the birth rate. Experts are not sure. That means that in this case, we're talking about something that I'm not sure about. This, we're talking about probably a 50-50 chance. That may be true or may not be true. We are not certain. We're talking about maybe. And a maybe is a 50-50. Okay? Then, do not use mind. It is very rare. I was telling you at the beginning that may not and might not, they are not going to have a contraction because they are not used at all for common spoken English. The economy may not affect the birth rate or the economy mayn't affect the birth rate. You even see that when you try to pronounce it, you say mayn't or might. That doesn't sound proper. That doesn't sound natural at all. And that's the reason why it's not used. Can is not usually used for express probability. Use may, might, or could. Can, we are going to see a case in which we are going to use can, but it's not on this one. Well, we see it on letter C. That is can't when you're almost certain. But can in the affirmative form is not used for talking about probabilities. For that reason, when we're talking about present probabilities in the affirmative form, we're going to use could, may, or might. But cannot, we cannot use it. Well, can, we cannot use it. Sorry for the mistake over there. So can in the affirmative form to make guesses is not proper use of this structure. Okay, just cannot, or could, or might, or may. Okay, they can be relaxed, they look so similar. So the next one, we're going to focus right now answering questions about the present. This is really simple because you can use the models of present probability to answer questions about the present. Use them when you are not 100% sure about your answer. So the reason why we're going to use models of probability is because we're not sure about the answer at all. So in this case, for example, if somebody asks you, where are they? They may be at home. You are not sure. You probably have some idea, but you're not totally 100% sure that they are at home. You don't have the evidence. You don't have the facts that will back you up on the situation. What does this information mean? It could mean society is changing. It's your interpretation, it's your guess, it's what you believe that may be the meaning of that kind of information. In short, to yes and no questions, you can use the model alone. For example, in this case, do they know about this? They must. So in this case, when we're talking about yes, no questions, I want you to remember that we can just do it in the short way to answer them. We just have the subject and we just have the model and that's it. We don't need anything else. You can also use the long form if you prefer it, but it's most commonly use the short form for this kind of questions. If be is in the main verb, in yes, no questions, use the modal plus be in short answers. For example, are they correct? Be is in the, when I talk about be, I talk about the verb to be in any form. I mean is, am, or are. And then you see they must be, okay? Use the modal plus be in short answers. So when somebody asks you a question with the verb to be and you are not certain about the answer, you have to use the form of the verb be, not the verb to be. That means that you're not going to use is, am, or are in your answer. That means that you're going to use just the verb be after the modal, as it is, no changes whatsoever. They must be. For example, I can tell you, let's say another example like, is the teacher correct for saying something? Is the teacher correct? And then probably some of you say, he must be. He must be. I'm not sure, but he must be. He's a teacher. Why doubt of him? But maybe we commit mistakes sometimes. So that is an example. That is how they are used. I hope it is understood. Now we're going to move on to the modals of future probability that we have studied them before. If you remember when we studied the modal verbs, we have cannot, could not or could, may or may not, might or might not, and should or should not. To talk about future probability. What's the difference? We're going to see in a second. Society may change a lot in the future. We're making a guess about things that will happen in the future in this case. Things that may change in the future or things that may be different later on. It shouldn't be difficult to see how things change. It shouldn't be difficult to see how things change. Okay? We're going to see the structure right now. Let's continue. Sorry, I made a mistake over there with the presentation. So, anyways, we're going to start with the affirmative statement that in this case, we're talking about these, the subject, the modal verb, and the base form of the verb. So, in this case, we're going to start with the subject, the modal verb, and the base form of the verb as well. So we have, I will be different in the future. In this case, we're using to see, but why is will over there? If you remember, will is a modal verb as well. Will is a verb that we commonly use when we are talking about guesses in the future. If you remember, we talked that will can be used about predictions, promises, things that you want to do, intentions, etc. So it's a modal verb at all. I should be different in the future. I may be different, or I could be different. Okay, negative statements. So students, we have over here the difference that is in this case the negative form. That is subject, modal verb, the base form of the verb, and any complement. No changes whatsoever. If you see, basically nothing changes from the affirmative statements to the negative statements. What is the difference? Over here, we're going to see the subject, the modal verb with the particle not or the contraction, the base form, and the complement at all. So I could not be different, I cannot, I shouldn't be, I may not, I might not, etc., etc., etc. There is the same pattern that we have been following. Okay, so we have will not, won't, could not, couldn't, cannot, can, should not, shouldn't, may not, and might not. Remember, may not and might not cannot be in the contracted. Let's move on to the uses as well. When we're talking about future probability as well, you have the same scale. That is certain, almost certain, fairly certain, and not certain. Use the future will or be going to when you're certain about the future. For example, more people will live in cities in the future, and a lot of cities are going to be bigger in the future. You see that in this case, we're making a guess, right? Because we cannot be certain about the future. But if you remember, we saw that the difference between will and going to is that for one of them, you are more certain than the other because you have evidence. And in this case, we're talking about going to. You have the evidence of something will be different in the future. But will, you don't have that evidence, okay? With will, you don't have it at all. So what I'm trying to tell you right now is that if you remember when we studied will and going to and what were their differences, we discovered or we learned that the difference was that one is for certainty and the other one is for an uncertain future. In this case, the book is telling you that they are certain in the future, but that is not completely true. Okay, I want to clarify that and leave that out of the way. That is not completely true. Just in the case that you're talking about going to, but will can have some level of certainty, but there are some circumstances for that. Like for example, that you have an evidence, it's a promise, but you cannot always be so certain about the future. Then you have use cannot or can't when you are almost certain that something is possible in the future. When you're almost certain that something is possible in the future. They usually express strong disbelief or surprise. We usually use can't. So use cannot or can when you are almost certain. Almost certain. Or as we say in Spanish, casi seguro. That something is impossible in the future. They usually express, as we saw in the last time, strong disbelief or surprise. So when you don't believe that something is possible in the future, you can say can't or cannot. That's the things that you say that cannot happen at all in the future. For example, this one. The economy can't get any worse. What a full example, because it's going to get worse because of the situation we're living in. But can get worse. That's impossible. That's your belief that you believe that that will not happen at all. You should not or shouldn't when you are fairly certain about the future. Often because you have evidence. In the negative, we usually use shouldn't. As in the last example, the difference is just simple. That should or shouldn't when you are fairly certain. So that means that you are really certain, but not certain completely. So remember, 100, over here 100, over here probably 80 or 90, and probably 70 or 60 over here. We have the changes in society should be clear. Okay, should be clear. Changes in society should be clear. That means that they will be clear. And society will change at all. Especially now that we're living this kind of situation, I guess society will be different after this. But that's a topic for another day. It shouldn't be difficult to see the changes. The same. And finally, when we are not certain, that means 50-50. We are guessing, we're trying to see if we're right or wrong. Is use may not, or could, when you are not certain about the future. You are certain, but you are making as well an educated guess. And I tell you, an educated guess is your opinion of something that may happen. Okay? That's why, for example, when you see somebody in an interview, they will use may or may not a lot because they are not certain, right? If they ask you, for example, how do you think the country will change in the future? Well, there may be some changes. There may be less violence, more, the economy may grow. We're making an educated guess. People may live with family in the future. That's an example. It could be more difficult to find affordable housing. That's another example of a probability as well. Do not contract or may not or mind is rare. As we saw, and I have been telling throughout the whole video, may not and might shouldn't be used in the contracted form, okay? There may not be any changes in the statistics next year. So they may not. Educated guess as well. Must, can, and couldn't are not usually used for future probabilities. So you see over here that here in the future, we don't have must, we don't have can in the affirmative form, and we don't have couldn't. Because remember that couldn't is for the past, because it's the past of can. But you can use could in the affirmative form to talk about the future, okay? But not in the negative form. Can as well can only be used in the negative form, but not in the affirmative to talk about the future, and must cannot be used at all, okay? Must, instead of must, we're going to use will and going to, okay? Because they are the ones that are the equivalent or to certain or to almost certain. They mustn't be tomorrow, they can be tired, or they couldn't be here tomorrow. Now we're going to move on just to questions and answers about the future probability. We have should, may, and might, and could are not usually used to ask questions about the future. Okay? Use the future form instead. As we saw in the other examples, for example, over here, just imagine that if I want you to think about this. Try to make a sentence using should, may, or might to ask something about the future. Not possible, right? You cannot say, should the planet change in the following years? No, because in that case, we're asking for a recommendation, right? An opinion, but not about the future. So we're going to always use will or going to. Are you going to go to the lecture? Yes, but I might be late. Future probability. When is the lecture going to start? It should start in a few minutes. Okay, you see, we're going to use going to over there. How long will the economy have problems? It could be a long time. You are not sure. Remember that we're always going to use these models when we are not sure about the answer. Okay, we're not certain. In short, answers with yes, no questions, you can use just the model alone. Will society change? It should. In the other cases, right? If you remember, if you have questions, in this case, if there are yes, no questions, not double-edged question, but yes, no questions, in this case, you can use answer with the subject and the model. If B is in the main verb in yes or no questions, you can use the model plus B in short answers. The same that in the last case. Is the economy going to be different? It should be. You're talking about the future, right? So remember your subject, modal verb, and the be form of the verb. Not is, not am, not are, just be. And that's the end of the topic, okay? That's everything that we have for future and present probability and the models that we have used to that. I hope that this video is helpful to you. I hope that you have learned. If you have any questions, you know you can reach to me and I will gladly answer your questions. And I hope this had been helpful to you. As you see, we have the camera today. I was trying to do something different, trying to see if this improves the videos for you or this improves the explanation in any way, shape, or form. If in this case, I want to tell you guys, please stay home, please stay safe. This is going to end up soon, okay? Faithful that this is going to end up soon and we will see together again. We will see each other in the classroom because I miss you a lot. I miss my classes a lot at inside, but I believe that this will end soon. God bless you all with your family. Take care and stay safe. And I will see you on the next video for the next class until next week. Take care.